Welcome to a new Daily Top Askreddit video. Today's topic:
what crazy shit happened in 2001 which got overshadowed by 9/11? It was discovered that the McDonald's Monopoly game had been rigged by an insider for years, and all the largest prizes were funneled to his personal friends as well as the Gambino crime family. The trial for this fraud started on September 10, 2001, so pretty much all news coverage was overshadowed by 9/11. This one. And as a Canadian, I find this particularly galling, as it emerged in the trial that the game was designed so that a top prize was never going to be distributed in Canada. I think although this is incredibly sus. I mean, how convenient is that for McDo? They caught the Green River Killer, the most prolific serial killer in the USA, a few weeks after. If 9/11 had not happened, I believe this would have been the major news event of the year. He killed for decades. The family of a murdered girl in my hometown was set to go on, I think it was 2020. It was some nationally syndicated program. They were going to get a chance to get attention on the daughter's case. It was set the week of 9/11. They never did go on TV about it at all. And was so disgusting. He stashed corpses in the woods and would go back to violate them. Dude is absolutely vile. I watched the documentary on him and I was done hearing about serial killers. Ted Bundy did that too. There were some women who were thought to be Bundy victims who were Green River victims, or vice versa, and a few women who turned out to be neither. At least one death was later shown to have been accidental, IRC, so she had not been murdered at all. Just a few weeks after the attacks on September 11, a passenger aircraft crashed in suburban Queens, NY, killing 260 people on board. This event coincided with the aftermath of 9/11, so naturally people assumed it was a second wave of attacks. What's interesting about this is that after that plane helicopter crash earlier this year in DC, it was labeled the worst US commercial airline crash since 2001. So many people I've talked to think it's referring to 9/11, but it's actually referring to the crash you mentioned. Kinda similar to how Kamala Harris was the first POC vice president since the 1930s and not the first ever, since Charles Curtis existed. But most people probably don't realize that he's actually the first. The craziest part was one of the victims of 9/11 who survived ended up dying in that plane crash. One of the victims, Hilda Yolanda Mail, had previously survived the September 11 attacks, having escaped from the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Quote, "That's some next level, Final Destination crap. Really crazy. Kinda similar story, but I knew a girl that was at the Las Vegas shooting, the country music festival, and survived, and the next year was at the Borderline country bar shooting in Thousand Oaks, CA, and also survived that one. AFAIK, she's doing fine, but I'm sure that would give someone bad PTSD. And another not so fun fact, a different 9/11 survivor would also die in a Staten Island ferry accident shortly after the attacks as well. The killing of Henryk Siwiak, a person who was murdered in NYC on 9/11. Not properly investigated because law enforcement was diverted to the terror attacks. The only reported homicide on that day. Also check out Dr. Sneha and Philip, who went missing 9/10. Pretty interesting podcast on her case. My wife died a couple of weeks earlier. Not really big news to most people, but was some crazy shit for me. And her, I guess. Brew, I also choose this guy's dead wife, was the joke that got me to create an account. And her, I guess, gave me those same vibes. Hope you're doing okay, buddy. The massacre of royal family of Nepal. I remember watching this on news as a kid. Didn't really understand it back then. It was reported that the younger brother wiped out his brother who was the king and all his descendants in order to establish himself as the new king. The day before 9/11, George Carlin taped a comedy special titled, "I Kinda Like It When a Lot of People Die." It never saw the light of day. Pretty sure he just changed it to Complaints and Grievances if I'm not mistaken. They scrapped that show, but he recorded the new one with a lot of the same material except for his big finishing piece, which was a long, in-depth, and I bet incredibly funny, account of society collapsing in the wake of a human-created disaster. The special he did after he addressed the elephant in the room right off the bat, referring to 9/11. Michael Jackson gave 2 shows in New York, together with his brothers. That was on September 7 and on September 10. That's why I was in New York on 9/11. And on 9/15, I had to board a plane to get back home to Germany. I went to the show on the 7th. I feel that was like the end of the 90s. Everything changed after. Thankfully they recorded the concerts. The 80s ended when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Berlin Wall fell. The 90s ended by 9/11 and the 10s ended when COVID-19 hit. What event ended the O? Perhaps the recession, or maybe the Syrian refugee crisis. Or perhaps the Arab Spring. That was probably the safest time to fly in all of human history. As flights resumed, I found myself on a 747 to HNL. The airline needed the plane moved, or it wouldn't have otherwise flown. We had only 7 passengers. The Chandra Levy disappearance and ensuing media circus around Gary Condit. Locally, there was a pretty decent-sized earthquake on the evening of September 9 under Beverly Hills. I remember Chandra being on the news a lot before 9/11. Metal Gear Solid 2 predicted social media and its effects on politics and society at large. A quote from the game: "Everyone withdraws into their own small gated community, afraid of a larger forum. They stay inside their little ponds leaking whatever truth suits them into the growing cesspool of society at large. The different cardinal truths neither clash nor mesh. No one is invalidated, but nobody is right. Not even natural selection can take place here. The world is being engulfed in truth. And this is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. Pretty accurately reflects the mess we're in today. And this is before Facebook or even MySpace existed. Kojima has an uncanny ability to see what's coming around the bend and to predict how society will act. Death Stranding was a really strange experience during the COVID lockdown. The "this is the way" line is the end of the poem The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. Alia died in a plane crash just a couple weeks prior. She was only 22. Also infuriating given it was a completely preventable death. They overloaded a tiny little twin-engine plane with too much audio equipment, plus wasn't one of her bodyguards, a really big dude, like 300 pounds upwards, also on the plane. Yes, the pilot initially refused to fly the plane because of the weight issues. They flew to the Bahamas on a larger plane and tried to bring back all the audio equipment on a much smaller plane. The pilot also had trouble starting one of the engines. Oh, and the pilot had cocaine in his system when he was found, and his FAA license was falsified and didn't have the required flight time needed to have his license. Even more bizarre, sad is that Alia was very nervous about flying such a small plane and refused to board it, opting to wait the next day when the jet they originally chartered would be available. But they kept trying to get her on the flight. Eventually she said she had a headache and went into a cab to rest. Someone in her group gave her a pill and some water, and she quickly fell asleep afterwards and was carried onto the plane. No one knows if the pill was a sedative, but it's speculated that she was drugged so she would board the plane. I know this airport, though extended in 2014. Its runway was so short that not only was it restricted to small aircraft, they could only operate in early morning or late afternoon because air temperatures, a very nice 85 degrees, meant the lower air density increased takeoff distances. Executed what's his fucking face from the Oklahoma City bombings. Timothy McVeigh, the original OK Boomer. Timmy, he got executed like an hour drive away from me. I think about it every time I make the mistake of visiting Terre Haute, Indiana. On Sunday, September 9, 2001, 60 Minutes aired an interview with Anne Hesh in which she proclaimed her ability to communicate telepathically with faraway space aliens, or maybe interdimensional beings, don't remember the details. It was the main focus of every late-night show's monologue on Monday. Never mentioned again by Tuesday for obvious reasons. My favorite observation about people communicating telepathically with aliens was Carl Sagan's remark that somehow, those aliens never know any more than we do. None ever comes across with plans for cold fusion, or a cure for cancer, or anything that would demonstrate that they are technologically superior to us and that someone is actually communicating with them. On the flip side of this, the people who Scythe reincarnated and can remember their past lives. None of these people were ever just peasants or servants, even though 99.9% of history's population falls into that category. They also cannot tell you any more about the famous characters than you can source from the most basic history book. Strange. All the warnings that 9/11 was coming. In fact, all the warnings that 9/11 was coming from as early as the Clinton years. In December 1998, the CIA's Counterterrorist Center reported to President Bill Clinton that Al-Qaeda was preparing for attacks in the U.S. That might include hijacking aircraft. In April 2001, Ahmad Shah Massoud, leader of the anti-Taliban Northern Alliance, asked for humanitarian aid for the people of Afghanistan. Massoud told the European Parliament that his intelligence agents had gained limited knowledge about a large-scale terrorist attack on U.S. soil being imminent. Massoud was assassinated by Al-Qaeda 2 days before the 9/11 attacks. On the same day, Vladimir Putin called Bush and expressed his concerns over Massoud's assassination, warning him that something larger might be afoot. On May 1, 2001, the CIA informed the White House that a group presently in the United States was in the process of planning a terrorist attack. On June 13, 2001, Osama bin Laden made a tape for supporters mentioning a possible attack on the G8 summit in Genoa, Italy. The plan was said to involve a plane packed with explosives being crashed into the summit to kill President Bush and other world leaders in attendance. The president's daily brief on June 29, 2001, stated that the United States is not the target of a disinformation campaign by Osama bin Laden. The document repeated evidence surrounding the threat, including an interview that month with a Middle Eastern journalist in which bin Laden aides warned of a coming attack, as well as competitive pressures that the terrorist leader was feeling, given the number of Islamists being recruited for the separatist Russian region of Chechnya. The CIA reiterated that the attacks were anticipated to be near-term and have dramatic consequences. In July 2001, J. Coffer Black, CIA's counterterrorism chief, and George Tenet, CIA's director, met with Condoleezza Rice to inform her about communications intercepts and other top-secret intelligence showing the increasing likelihood that al-Qaeda would soon attack the United States. Rice listened but was unconvinced, having other priorities on which to focus. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld questioned the information, suggesting it was a deception meant to gauge the U.S. response. On the same day, FBI Special Agent Kenneth Williams sent a letter to FBI headquarters warning of suspects connected to al-Qaeda who were attending flight schools in Arizona, and demanding further investigation. This document is known as the Phoenix Memo. On August 6, 2001, the president's daily briefing, titled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S., warned that bin Laden was planning to exploit his operatives' access to the U.S. to mount a terrorist strike. Rice responded to the claims about the briefing in a statement before the 9/11 Commission, stating the brief was not prompted by any specific threat information, and did not raise the possibility that terrorists might use airplanes as missiles. On the 23rd of August 2001, the Mossad gave the CIA a list of 19 suspects living in the U.S. who were believed to be mounting an imminent attack on the United States. Only 4 of the names are known, but all belonged to eventual hijackers in the attacks. The head of the Algerian State Intelligence Service (DRS), General Mohammed Medine, went to the U.S. a few days before the 9/11 attacks. He spoke of an imminent attack against the United States based on a secret memo sent on September 6 by Smain Lamari, the number 2 in the DRS at the time. Shortly after the attacks, only 2 civilian planes were authorized to take off, the one carrying members of the Saudi royal family and people close to bin Laden, and the one bringing General Mohammed Medine to Algiers. The only shocking thing about 9/11 is that it was allowed to happen at all. People talk about 9/11 being an inside job, but the reality is that Bush and co. were just utterly fucking useless at their jobs. I recently read a good write-up in our Ask Historians about this very topic, and there's a lot of nuance to it. https://www.reddit.com/r/askhistorians/s/i775jtrixr. A far better analysis of the situation IMO that everyone should read to understand the complexities of predicting and handling terrorism. Everything you're saying is information, news that the general public found out about after the fact, not stuff that the average person knew about in real time. Even the sources you mentioned, Coffer Black, George Tenet, Kenneth Williams, etc., are on record as saying there wasn't enough information known to stop the attack. Just enough to know an attack was coming, and that they needed to change their approach in how they were pursuing it, from a criminal investigation to a wartime approach, in order to stop the attack. I mean, if you read through that whole list, it's a lot of things that without the hindsight we have, there is zero chance you'd have said, oh yeah, they're going to crash hijacked planes into US targets. Literally one of them is talking about packing a plane with explosives and crash it into a foreign summit. It was a novel attack that no one had considered before. Just as Timothy McVeigh had a novel attack that no one considered before, which is why it was so easy for both attacks to happen.